As we think about some of these examples of the ways that we might deceive ourselves and some sort of practical examples of how that happens in our lives on a really daily basis, it's really helpful to use some of our theoretical orientations to unpack and understand self-deception from a deeper level, from a more theoretical level. And so I want to go over a few of those. I'm going to start with really our first talk therapy, the psychodynamic and psychoanalytic tradition. And really, Sigmund and Anna Freud were the first mental health professionals to detail formally how self-deception emerges in clients. And they did that through ego defense mechanisms, which probably sounds really familiar to many of you. The idea that we protect our egos, our core sense of self, from information that would hurt us. And we do that by using these defense mechanisms, which are essentially ways of lying to ourselves. So, for example, denial, actively rejecting the truth. Denial is anytime you hear clients or yourself saying, that is not true. There is absolutely no possibility that I am like that, or that my life is like that, or that I'm wrong. No, no, no. Another defense mechanism talked about often by the psychodynamic folks is projection. This is when you take an undesirable aspect of yourself and apply it to someone else. So I'm not like that. I'm not jealous. I don't struggle with my own physical appearance. I don't struggle with being confident. You're the one who's jealous. You're the one who's cheating. You're like that, not me. And so instead of acknowledging that we have these tendencies too, we blame the outside world or other people and attribute something negative to them instead of ourselves. Repression from a dynamic perspective is taking something that's really difficult to admit and stuffing it down into your unconscious. So it's this idea that you selectively forget something because admitting it is too painful. So from a dynamic perspective, we often hear them talk about sexual urges get repressed. Or if you have a traumatic experience, you may just forget all of the details, not because you weren't conscious at the time, not because you weren't present, but because admitting what actually happened was so painful that you selectively push it down and push it down. Displacement is when we transfer a negative emotion or a negative reaction from one object to another. So the classic example of this is when you have a bad day at work or you have something really difficult happen in your life and you go home and you yell at your kids or you kick the dog, or instead of actually addressing the situation in your life that's causing you discomfort or causing you pain, you take it out on another situation or another person. It may even be that you have a bad day, so you go home and binge eat, something like that, instead of acknowledging the reality of what's making you upset. From a cognitive behavioral perspective, which was really pioneered by experts like Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, and has moved into sort of the third wave CBT realm of Stephen Hayes and Marsha Linehan. We really talk a lot about self-deception through cognitive distortions. So as many of you probably know, cognitive distortions are ways that our thoughts deceive us. It's the characteristic ways that our thinking is actually inaccurate. And if we take a step back and just look at humans, the truth is that most of us want to think that our thoughts are facts. We want to believe that if there's some thought running through our head, that it's actually true. But the truth is that much of what we think as humans is very flawed and factually quite inaccurate. So when we think about the ways that our thoughts are stereotypically inaccurate, here are some of the most common. Rationalization. This is creating a reason to excuse yourself or to excuse someone else's behavior. So, for example, you may say, well, yes, I yelled at my child. I yelled at them. The reason that I yelled at them is they weren't listening, or they didn't turn in their homework, or they deserved it because they weren't behaving themselves. That is a way of excusing our yelling or screaming in lieu of saying, I did yell at my child. The situation was that they were misbehaving, but I'm actually very uncomfortable with the fact that I screamed at them because that's not the kind of parent I want to be. Emotional reasoning. This is any time that we conclude that our emotional reaction to something is an accurate reflection of reality, of our current life circumstance. So, for example, we feel very anxious or very upset in a moment, and we may think, well, I'm really upset right now. So there's something in my current environment that caused it. It's my partner's fault, or it's my work's fault, or something out here. Instead of considering that our emotional reactions to things are often incredibly complicated. And it may be that the current situation is actually triggering something in us that has very little to do with the current circumstance you're in, and much more to do with your perception of how you're interpreting it and how much it's touching on a deeper pain that you learned long ago in your life that this reminds you of. Labeling. Labeling is anytime we use one descriptor or one trait to universally make a conclusion about someone or something. So you're lazy, you're mean, you're ugly, you're stupid. Usually labeling is done in a negative context, and when it is, it can be incredibly harmful to ourselves when we do it to ourselves and to others when we do it to them. And polarized thinking. This is seeing the world in extremes. Anytime we think all or nothing, good or bad, black or white, always or never, it's when we have this very extreme polarized way of being, instead of recognizing that the reality is the world is full of gray. And so are we as humans. And it's very rare that something is all good or all bad, or that we should really describe always and never, because generally speaking, it's somewhere in the middle.